Jack Hayes was a man who had seen and done it all. At 35, he had served in the military for over a decade. With his rugged looks, short-cropped hair, and a well-built frame, Jack carried himself with quiet confidence. He wasn't a man who sought attention, but his presence alone commanded respect. Having just returned to civilian life, Jack was adjusting to a slower pace in his small hometown, nestled somewhere between the bustling cities and the rolling countryside. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Jack decided to take his old Ford truck for a drive. The truck had been with him through thick and thin, and he liked the simplicity of maintaining it himself. After a peaceful drive, he pulled into a small gas station off the highway to refuel. He wore his favorite MAGA hat, something he didn't think much about. It wasn't a statement for him. It was just another cap he'd thrown on before heading out. The gas station was quiet, save for the occasional sound of cars speeding by. Jack stepped out of his truck, began filling the tank, and took a moment to enjoy the fresh air. That's when he heard it, a loud, unmistakable rumble of motorcycles. He turned to see a group of bikers pulling into the station. There were 5 of them, all clad in leather jackets and bandanas, their engines roaring like thunder. The leader of the group, a burly man named Vince, was the first to notice Jack. Vince was a man who loved stirring up trouble. Standing over 6 feet tall, with a bushy beard and tattoos running up his arms, he was used to people stepping aside when he walked by. Spotting Jack's hat, Vince nudged his buddy Kyle and smirked. "Look at that," Vince said, loud enough for Jack to hear. "We got ourselves a patriot over here." The other bikers chuckled as they parked their bikes. Jack ignored the comment, focusing on the task at hand. He wasn't the kind of man to pick a fight over words, but Vince wasn't one to be ignored. He walked over to Jack, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. "Nice hat, soldier," Vince said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You proud of that?" Jack glanced at him briefly, his blue eyes calm but sharp. "Just a hat," he replied evenly, then turned back to his truck. "Just a hat, huh?" Vince said, stepping closer. "You know, some people might take offense to that." Jack didn't respond. He had dealt with far worse situations in his life than a loudmouth biker looking for trouble. He finished pumping his gas, replaced the nozzle, and reached for his wallet. Vince, however, wasn't ready to let it go. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. Jack froze for a moment, then slowly turned around. His expression was calm, but there was a steeliness in his eyes that made Vince hesitate for just a second. "I'd suggest you take your hand off me," Jack said quietly, his voice steady and firm. The other bikers gathered around, forming a loose circle. Kyle, the youngest of the group, sneered, "What's the matter, tough guy? Can't take a joke?" Jack took a step back, putting some distance between himself and Vince. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to back down either. "I don't have a problem with any of you," he said. "Let's keep it that way." But Vince wasn't done. "Or what?" he challenged, his voice rising. "You gonna call your buddies to come save you?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he calmly put his wallet back in his pocket and leaned against his truck, waiting to see what they would do next. His composure seemed to irritate Vince even more. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Vince spat. "Walking around with that hat, acting like you own the place." At that moment, another car pulled into the station. It was an older woman, probably in her 70s, driving a dusty sedan. She parked at the pump next to Jack and stepped out, glancing nervously at the group of bikers. Jack noticed her hesitation and gave her a reassuring nod. "Ma'am," he said, his tone polite, "do you need help with the pump?" The woman smiled faintly, her hands trembling as she held her credit card. "That's very kind of you," she said. "I'm not too good with these machines." Jack walked over and began helping her, completely ignoring the bikers. This small act of kindness seemed to infuriate Vince even more. "Hey!" Vince shouted. "I'm not done with you." Jack didn't even look up. He finished helping the woman, then stepped back to his truck. "Have a safe day, ma'am," he said with a slight nod. The woman thanked him and quickly got back into her car, driving away as fast as she could. Jack watched her go, then turned back to the bikers. "All right," he said, his voice still calm. "What's it gonna be?" Vince took a step forward, but before he could say anything, Kyle interrupted. "Wait," Kyle said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Jack. "You're Jack Hayes, aren't you?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Do I know you?" "My brother served with you in Afghanistan," Kyle said, his tone shifting from mockery to something almost like respect. "He told me about you, said you saved his life." For a moment, the tension hung in the air. Vince looked confused, glancing between Kyle and Jack. "What's he talking about?" Vince demanded. Kyle ignored him, his focus on Jack. "You're a hero," he said. "My brother said he owed everything to you." Jack didn't respond right away. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man who had done his duty. "Your brother's a good man," he said finally. "Tell him I said hello." Kyle nodded, stepping back. Vince, sensing the shift in the group, scowled but didn't say anything. One by one, the bikers started to back off, their earlier bravado replaced by an uneasy respect. Jack climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove away without another word. As he pulled back onto the highway, he couldn't help but shake his head. He wasn't looking for trouble, but sometimes trouble found him anyway. And if there was one thing Jack Hayes knew, it was how to handle trouble when it came knocking. As the open road stretched out ahead of him, Jack replayed the encounter in his mind. He thought about Vince, the type of man who thrived on intimidation, and Kyle, who recognized him not as a stranger, but as someone who had stood for something larger than himself. Jack had spent years fighting battles most people couldn't imagine, but today's skirmish wasn't about fists or weapons. It was about character. The hum of his truck's engine was a steady comfort, blending with the rhythmic beat of his thoughts. Jack knew the world was filled with people like Vince, those who barked the loudest to mask their own fears. But it was people like Kyle's brother that reminded him why he'd put on the uniform in the first place, why he'd sacrificed so much to protect the values he believed in. As the miles rolled by, Jack found himself smiling faintly, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Life had a way of testing you in the moments you least expected, and today, like so many times before, Jack had let his actions speak louder than words. Somewhere in the distance, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the landscape. Jack adjusted his MAGA hat slightly, not because of the symbol it carried, but because it reminded him of something deeper, standing tall, even when others tried to knock you down. He thought of the old woman at the gas station, her grateful smile, and how a simple gesture of kindness could ripple outward in ways he might never know. That was the kind of legacy Jack wanted to leave behind, not one of conflict, but one of quiet strength and dignity. As the first stars began to dot the sky, Jack whispered to himself, "Sometimes the best way to fight isn't to fight at all." And with that thought, he pressed his foot on the accelerator, ready for whatever the next turn in the road might bring. That's the story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure sharing it with you all. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see the global reach of these stories. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories, tips, and tricks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.